Action needs to happen everywhere at every scale. So it doesn't really matter if you're taking on something really small. I mean, that's one of the permaculture principles. Start small, obtain a yield, succeed in your small project so that you feel good about it. I mean, I'll never forget being in my 20s and the first time I picked my own salad and took it to a potluck. Like I was so proud of myself, I could hardly stand it. I'm like, I grew that salad. And but I was feeding people from my own garden. Like it felt really good. And I was really bolstered by that success.
Welcome to each of you from wherever you're coming in from around the world. We are so happy that you've joined us for this conversation. So in light of our quickly changing climate, we're going to explore what is our most urgent work. Grow food, play music, Mālama, Pono, take good care, could be the answer. Jenny Pell, a certified permaculture designer and activist, now living in Hawaii, will share her views. I am Beck Mordini, the Executive Director of Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. For 10 years, Bio for Climate has been sharing the science and the stories of the power of restoring ecosystems to stabilize the climate. We're delighted to bring you this presentation in partnership with the GBH Forum Network as part of our Life Saves the Planet program. Jenny has a lot to share. We'll start by exploring some key topics in our conversation, and then those last 20 minutes will be reserved for Q&A. So let me introduce Jenny Pell. I first met Jenny last year in preparation with Louise Mitchell for our Redesigning Our Communities conference in Oregon. This happened right after the fires in Lahaina, so I was very interested in her local experience. But what I got was not only insight into the situation in Hawaii, but a lifetime of experience and wisdom applying permaculture principles. And there is so much more to Jenny. I'm going to share a little from her bio. She is a former tree planter, helicopter pilot, carpenter, and yurt builder. She's currently an international permaculture design consultant, specializing in climate-resilient agroforestry and neighborhood food solutions. Based on Maui, Jenny's portfolio spans urban, suburban, and rural designs. They include watershed restoration, rehydration systems, and earthworks to passively harvest water and stop erosion. Profitable organic agriculture and agritourism, appropriate technologies, and policy work related to food security. She covers it all. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, Beck. It's great to be here.
So why don't we start with the title of this talk and why you chose this title?
Post-COVID, I took about a year off on a sabbatical and coming back into my now turning 60 stage of my career, it's like, what do I want to focus on? And, the grow food, I've been teaching people to grow food for decades, play music. And Mālama Pono is a Hawaiian expression that means to take good care, to take good care of yourself, to take good care of your family, your ohana, to take good care of your community, the water, the land. And so if we can just infuse our actions with this concept of Mālama Pono, we're really on the right track. The other corollary piece of that is where a lot of us in the work that I'm doing now, we're all sort of middle-aged, older women. And so our nickname are the vigil aunties. And so it's time for the aunties to step up and really insert ourselves into the conversation, into the activism, because people sit up and listen when we have all this kind of experience behind us now.
There's a real heartfeltness to that title, and particularly to, the take good care part of it. But we're here to talk about something pretty serious. And it's time that we need to have this conversation because of where we are right now in the climate chaos or climate crisis. And so the way I would like to structure our conversation this evening is to kind of start with that problem. Like, why do we need to have this conversation now? And then we'll talk about some of the solutions that you've worked with and end up with action items that people can follow. In general, we'll see what happens.
Right.
So maybe, Jenny, start by sharing, like, what do you see is at risk right now, and particularly in our food system?
I started learning about global warming in college. So for more than 40 years ago, we were learning about even changing this potential changes in the Gulf Stream, for example, the changes of currents, things that are back in the news again these days as if they're new things. So I believed it back then. I thought that climate change was going to be the driving force of our culture as I aged, and that's proved to be very true. What I didn't see was the concurrent rise in nationalism and fascism and authoritarianism leadership as we're stepping into this really unknown territory of massive grabs for arable land and potable water. Clearly, the shift is already on. I mean, the climate instability that we're experiencing now, this is just the beginning. So it's not really a question of whether or not climate instability is real or climate chaos is real or all the cascading things that happen because of that. It's really a question of how quickly is it going to happen. I mean, the veneer in some of these things is very thin, as we're already seeing. So I think it's going to be pretty fast. And we're woefully behind the curve in terms of skill sets and neighborhood preparedness and local food supplies. So my work these days is really focused on how do we get people engaged and skilled in the areas that are going to help support their local communities. I do work internationally, and I think that the climate resilient agroforestry part of it is really big for me. But the neighborhood food is just as big. I really enjoy working at that neighborhood level. And I think that's where most of our audience is going to be really keen to understand how do you tap into what's happening right around the corner from you.
Well, and we may assume that because people are tuning in to listen to this, that this is an obvious question, but what are the specific risks to particularly food security? The rest of the world is talking about how we need to get our electric buses going and address some of those other issues. Why food security?
With the amazingly stunning uptick in everything from floods to fires to droughts to displacement of peoples, it's interrupting the agricultural flow pretty significantly. Plus the distribution of those foods, I'm saying, from Hawaii viewpoint, most of our food is imported. Over 90% of all of Hawaii's food is imported. Almost all of that comes from Long Beach, California. So the disruptions in the food supply movement is one really big issue. But every year we're losing farms, we're losing seed banks, we're losing communities of people who work in the agricultural sector as their homes get taken out. So I know in Southern Oregon, they had a big fire a couple of years ago. All the local community people who worked on the farms, their whole trailer parks were just wiped out in the fire. So that all of the workforce was displaced. And so this diminishing capacity of our farms is hitting home already. So what happens when it's this summer coming up and it's 115 degrees for 40 days in a row or for 30 days in a row? What does that do to the soil? What does that do to the farms? What does that do to the farm workers? How are we preparing ourselves for these inevitabilities now in the food sector? So the food security part of it is huge. And if I was an elected official, I'd be very concerned about what it means to keep my local population fed.
I couldn't agree more. It seems like it should be obvious, but as long as there's food in the grocery stores, people don't think about it. But how many days of food are there in the grocery stores, and how vulnerable is your community? Uh, there is a talk from one of our conferences that specifically looks at that, and we'll put that link into the chat soon. The power of ecosystem restoration and why growing food must be our top priority goes into a little more detail on some of those food security issues, and particularly in urban areas. Uh, so what are some of the key principles of permaculture design that are most important in our current situation? Permaculture can be very complex and there's all these rules, but I know in one of our conversations, you boil it down to a few key principles I think are really great guiding light.
Yeah, it's not really that it's rules. We have, there's the core ethics of permaculture. How do you care for, and it's all by design. It's a design methodology. It's a design approach to resilient human communities. It's all about people in permaculture. I mean, if humans disappeared tomorrow, then Gaia would be just fine. The planet would probably be fine, right? But so we're really designing for humans, and what are the guiding ethics of that? So how do you by design care for the earth? How do you by design not damage the planet? How do you, by design, ethic number two, care for people? What does it look like to care for people in your design approach? And in an urban setting, it might be that there's little eddies of life where you can peel off and have coffee and meet with people, and then you belong in that landscape rather than you're this like tiny little person with a giant building and it's hot and there's no trees. And so like what does that design approach look like? I mean, just because in architecture you can have, you know, 80-foot tall windows doesn't mean it's a place that you feel like you belong in that building, right? So like, what does it look like to design even architecturally, to care for people? What does that look like? And then the third ethic is to, share your surplus. Whatever surplus you're generating, you want to be able to redistribute that in a way that's, that's that Mālama Pono part, right? It's like, how do you care for people? How do you care about generating a surplus that you have enough surplus to share? And it's a little antithetical to, capitalism, but we need to rethink how we interact with each other. So in permaculture, we have a long list of guiding principles that help us, achieve our design imperatives. It's all driven by the client. So if the client wants to have an urban oasis, great. If I live in a suburb in Maui right now, we could probably be growing 5% of our food in our own subdivision in a couple years if we designed it properly.
Well, and we will get to your subdivision, how we grow food a little bit later. But since you mentioned living in Maui, uh, one of the things that was happening the first time we met were the fires in Lahaina. And I know that you don't want to, step on the role of Indigenous leaders in that community, but I think it is important to see how an industrial mindset around land use can lead to such a tragic result. And, you had done work like a decade ago from that permaculture viewpoint and how that situation could have been prevented. And I think that would be very interesting to particularly Bio for Climate followers, like all the pieces of land use that could be considered. Would you mind, spending a few minutes just kind of outlining what happened there? And particularly because there's so many conflicting stories about what the real problem is.
Yeah, so in Lahaina's in a really hot, windy area of Maui, and it's a major tourist center, lots and lots of visitors, lots of people that live and work there in service to that economy. But it used to be a really big indigenous series of villages that all went up the watersheds. And the lands above where Lahaina town are was all in ulu forest. It was a big food forest, and up the watersheds were incredibly abundant kalo taro patches with all the master farming that happened there. So the Hawaiians are master farmers, master fishermen, master navigators, like all of the history of that, like the way that they cared for the land was pretty impressive. When the colonialists came in the late, 1700s and into the 1800s, they very quickly started to look at the agricultural possibilities. The whalers were there, the missionaries were there, and then these agricultural conglomerates came in, and they started growing things like sugarcane and pineapple. The international market for that shifted over the years. The damage to the local lands was substantial. So they basically plowed under all the breadfruit forests, all the ulu forests were just taken out by the sugarcane and pineapple people. And they went into monocropping sugarcane and pineapple. They also would just plow straight across those fields, and all that debris would go down into the watershed. And then when it rained, that would go down and choke out the reef. So it's a pretty comprehensive loss of food and culture and life and all of that. The lands above Lahaina have been sitting fallow for years with not being cared for. So that wind blows all that topsoil and all that grit, like blows into people's houses and down into the ocean. And just pioneer species have been growing up into those lands that are fire scaffolding brush fire species. And of course, the watershed is really damaged as well. So And then all our power lines are above ground. And, you know, trying really hard to get local county officials, state officials, people to pay attention to the fact that this fire danger is really high. It's not our first fire. It was just this um, confluence of things that happened that made it so utterly devastating. So we're stuck with this challenge of like, how do you restore, let's say that we wanted to restore that to a somewhat native design with other features involved. Like, I mean, as a permaculturalist, I have a long list of things I would put in there. Um, but the land is still owned by Maui Land and Pineapple. Like they still own the land. Like, why do they get to still own the land? This is the challenge for me. If you're going to destroy the land, rape the soil, destroy the watershed, kill the reef, be a vector for dangerous fire in, moving forward still, and you're not growing anything on the land, like I don't really understand that equation. Just fundamentally, I just don't understand it. So there's still a lot of displaced people. Um, the fire was so hot. So many things burned. The toxicity levels in the soil is so high that they've been excavating down 6 inches in the soil and testing it again, excavating down 8 inches, 12 inches. The first few areas have been approved for people to start rebuilding. A lot of carpetbaggers are showing up, and there's been some really good local led action to make sure that people just don't sell off what they have to the first person that comes along. So there's some land trust stuff happening there too. But even to the point of, wow, we need to finally put cover crops in to start to regenerate that land and reduce the fire danger. We don't have a bank of seeds available for that amount of thousands of acres to even do that reseeding. And so some people have been suggesting, well, let's just seed with plants that are also fire scaffolding plants, but they think it's better than nothing. And it's not. It's not better than nothing. It's important to actually choose the right kinds of plants so that we don't just set ourselves up for another disaster.
It's a really excellent example of where your priorities need to be in climate resilience and fire resilience. And I think one of the early things that was confusing is that people thought, well, this land isn't being farmed anymore, and you let it go back to nature, and that was the problem, right? But not the right kinds of things could grow after the land had been destroyed. Is that what happened?
Right. So, the sugarcane and pineapples both, they really deplete the soil. And it's already really hot and dry and windy, right? And so looking at how to passively harvest water across that landscape, from a permaculture lens, there's some really clear ways that we would do earthworks to support that. Um, but if you don't have local ownership of the land, then it's really hard to get the corporations to do the right thing, to do the Pono thing. And they're not doing the Pono thing. They're just land banking. I'm not sure if they are hoping to rezone it out of agriculture so they can develop it. It's that those are really hot button issues here on Maui and across the Hawaiian Islands. So, so yes, there's lots of things that we're struggling with and that we're working with. And the leadership in Lahaina, the local leadership at the county level has been really excellent. Our county councilwoman, they're on the ground, boots on the ground every day, helping families that are still displaced. And it's hard. It's really hard. And we have a mono culture of tourism, so we don't have a diversified economic base either. And this is a long-standing argument in Hawaii, which is some people think that the right kind of tourist, I'll put in little quotation marks, the right kind of tourist is the really wealthy tourist who's going to come and spend a lot of money. But the entitlement and privilege that comes with that does not dovetail with the local culture at all. And it doesn't really support local practitioners or people just to, have living wage jobs, except in service to really wealthy people, which is a challenge unto itself. I think the right kind of tourist is a tourist who cares. Like if you're a tourist who's going to come and you're going to cover your carbon footprint and plant some trees and do a beach cleanup and learn about the local culture, that's the right kind of tourist. Like that's like being able to leverage that tourism industry into direct culturally supportive jobs, that would be great. So it's an ongoing argument about how we're going to manage our diversified economy into the future, particularly post Lahaina fires.
Well, thank you for sharing the update of what's really going on the ground. And, we hear this so many times, we know what the right thing is, but there's so many barriers to implementing it. And you mentioned the bureaucratic barriers, plus just the physical barrier of not having the seed bank, not having the amount of seeds you need, which uh, I assume is part of what we need to develop. There's two other examples that maybe you can see how you want to talk about them. The food forest in Seattle, we can move on to. So what are some of the solutions? What can we do to secure our access to food, food security, and take local action? So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things I talk a lot about is what is how do we get to the place where we can scale jump from, right? So to go from, like I was saying in my own neighborhood, like to go from zero food grown in your neighborhood to 5%, that's hard. It's hard to get to that first level of skill sets, first level of infrastructure, first level of, community engagement where you're teaching people how to grow food and getting people engaged with that. That's hard. Getting from 5% to 20%, that's not that hard because you've got that core set of skills and you've got the core group of people working together. You've already got your outreach established. You already have, Tuesdays and Fridays or garden days or however you're going to look at that, right? So you the things that happen in those designs is that not only are you getting food and you're getting community, but you're also like the crime rate goes down and people conserve things and there's local compost solutions and you have agreement of what's happening in your neighborhood with common purpose. And I find that that's been a really successful modality. The project in Seattle we did, so I teach the permaculture design curriculum. A bunch of my students 10, 15 years ago did a final design project for their permaculture course where they were taking a local reservoir in the city of Seattle in a really low income neighborhood that's one of the most ethnically diverse zip codes in the country, which says a lot because Seattle's very white. So there's, a lot of different Asian groups, a lot of different African groups, a lot of different long time African American families, Latino people. There's projects. There's like it's a really interesting neighborhood. And in the middle of that neighborhood was a 40-acre piece of land that previously had barbed wire fences with thorny blackberries all around it. And there was a reservoir on top. And the local officials for Homeland Security thought that that was someone could poison the reservoir. So we have to cap the reservoir. So they capped the reservoir and it opened a 40-acre park in the middle of the city, which is really unusual. It's really amazing to get 40 new acres to play with. So what went in there was a, community center, a childcare center, like basketball courts, um, Samoan cricket, places to walk your dog, like all kinds of interesting things popped up. And the students from my class designed a permaculture food forest on 7 acres of that land. It became a very engaged multi-stakeholder project with the Seattle City Parks, the public utilities, the police, there's all these different, the Department of Neighborhoods, all these different groups were involved, and the local community, that they were the huge part of this design. So they're now 10 years in. It's been an absolute stunning success, not just for the local community, but it's also given people a template to reproduce in their own communities. And since that project started, food forests have just been popping up all over the country. And the Beacon Food Forest is one of the catalysts for that. Not the only one by any stretch, but certainly a big one. And we had tons of media. Like the first couple of years, we were on the radio, on TV, on like every week we had an interview. And they haven't stopped. Now they do summer camps, they do projects in Spanish, they have a LGBTQ group, they have a BIPOC group, they have plant propagation. I mean, it's been really successful. So that's been super fun to watch that grow.
What do you think were a couple of the keys to that being a successful project? Keys and challenges.
Well, the first key is that Seattle has a program. They have a department called the Department of Neighborhoods, and anyone can apply for a small, medium, and large grant through the Department of Neighborhoods. And that is an amazing thing. Every city should have a Department of Neighborhoods grants project. So usually what they do is the first small grant, it's like a organizational grant, or it's, it's a developing your ideas grant. And then you apply again, and then you go for more infrastructure level, or, different ways of that. And they work really side by side with you to make sure your project's a success. So they don't just give you money and leave you behind. They check in with you, they help you, they give you places to have meetings. And they require the first thing they required of us was that we had 3 community engagement meetings within the community. And the first meeting, people who were involved with permaculture from all over the area came because it was such an exciting big permaculture project. But the next time we had a meeting, we didn't invite them because it's about the local community. And we had translators for Chinese, we had childcare for people coming after work, we had dinner, we had dessert, we really had to learn a lot about how to accommodate the local community's needs. It's very different than like my needs. It's like it's what does that community need? So there's all those pieces of the learning curve. But once they got going, all these partners showed up, including the University of Washington architectural department did a design and then built all the structures that are there, and on and on. We had a big area set aside for indigenous and native plants. They got a science grant to do, taxonomy for the names of the plants and the ecosystem. And so they've just been building in this multi-stakeholder setting with great success. Yeah, it's a wonderful project. I love to watch them shift and change over the years.
Well, and I appreciate that it took a lot to be able to engage all those different stakeholder communities and from different cultures, right? And it's such an important part about having a community action. And we see that also with some of our reforestation work, our mini forests. And it's not easy. What else can people do? So, that's a municipal level, a very organized project. Let's talk about the suburbs.
Okay.
And when I had first said, the suburbs could change the world, we put that in our intro, and that's a trigger for some people because a lot of people see the suburbs as the problem. Uh, but where does action need to happen? Is it just in city parks, or are there opportunities for all of us?
Well, okay, so the first answer to that question is where does action need to happen? Action needs to happen everywhere at every scale. So it doesn't really matter if you're taking on something really small. I mean, that's one of the permaculture principles. Start small, obtain a yield, succeed in your small project so that you feel good about it. I mean, I'll never forget being in my 20s and the first time I picked my own salad and took it to a potluck. Like I was so proud of myself, I could hardly stand it. I'm like, I grew that salad. And but I was feeding people from my own garden. Like it felt really good. And I was really bolstered by that success. I've seen other people like they take on too much and then they fail and then they are discouraged. And then it's like it's really important that you learn as you grow. You learn as you go. Um, I've done a lot of design in urban settings. I lived in Seattle for a long time, and that was really great. We had a very progressive city council, and we all stacked all kinds of committees with local permaculture type folks, and we changed the rules in the city. So you were allowed to sell produce out of your backyard. You were allowed, developers got a whole extra floor on their townhouses and their condos if they put a rooftop garden in. You could have produce, you could have chickens, you could have like, so we started to change those city laws. Obviously, in the rural areas, there's all kinds of things we can do to support the farmers in and around our cities. But meanwhile, there's tons and tons and tons of suburbs. And the co-founder of permaculture, David Holmgren, he turned me on to this idea that the suburbs are actually these hidden treasures. We have a lot of land in the suburbs. We have really distinct boundaries around our subdivisions. And some suburbs have HOAs, some do not. Some have CCRs, some do not. So you have to work within the strictures of the HOA. If you do have a strict HOA, get on the board right now and go join that HOA and stack it with all your friends that are keen on the same things that you are. So I live on a third of an acre. I've been here about a year and 3 months. I already eat half the food that for my whole family comes out of my garden. And yes, I know what I'm doing. Yes, I teach people how to grow food, but I'm also hosting workshops. And I had a workshop, not this week, 2 weekends ago. I had 25 students from the Farm Apprentice Mentoring Program came, and they kicked my food forests butt, like it was amazing what we got done in a day. So not only did they pay me for the workshop, but they also, it was like 2,500, $3,000 worth of free labor. So you got to get that Tom Sawyer, put your Tom Sawyer hat on and figure out how to leverage people's keen interest in solutions and hire me from your community to come teach a workshop like that. So people left with seedlings. They left with value-added products from our little farmlet. They left with a sense of can do. They left with they saw what we're doing here in such a short amount of time. And just that, like tuning into the to what's possible is huge for people. This weekend, we're hosting a large group of Indigenous elders doing a water ceremony, and we just did a full moon event all night long on the beach with fire and the indigenous elders and the cantadores, and it was pretty amazing. And they're walking through our food forest saying, I'm taking pictures of this to take home to share with my community. I can't wait to get home and do my container gardens. And so, at every level, people that come here, like, and just sort of on a different level, I feel like there's a lot of fear of the unknown. There's a lot of despair. But I have a 17-year-old. I mean, to have kids just checking out because they're so despairing about the future. Um, it's hard. It's hard to give people hope again, and it's hard to help people feel empowered. Not maybe empowered is not the right word. It's more like excited. I want people to be excited to go get their hands dirty. And it doesn't have to be gardening. There's so many things that we need we need to work on right now. Gardening for me is the way I do it. I do it with food forests. I do it with plants. I love being in my garden. Um, but there's just so much work to be done. And I think that when you come to a place that is doing it and you see it firsthand, you're just like, okay, I could do that. I want people to leave my property with that. I can go home and do a piece of this. So we want to fill people's well springs back up again. That's that surplus. Like if your wellspring is overflowing, yay. If you belong to a church, churches have tons of land, like church, and they have like a very quick and small leadership. They have a youth ministries, they have food banks that they support. So if you have an acre or two or half acre at your church area, you could jump into a really cool. I've done several designs for churches that were really successful, really fun, really engaged groups of people. There's a really big, fat book on it's called Greening Your Congregation.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that are engaged with that too. So in the suburbs, what I love about the suburbs is that you have water, you have frontage, you often have little fractals of watersheds running through your subdivision. Sometimes they're available, sometimes they're fenced off. Most of the kids know how to get in and around the watersheds, or so they go play. And what does it look like to to Mālama to take care of that subdivision? There's a group in New Zealand rather than try to do eco villages or co-housing, they started to buy up properties in the same neighborhood. So whenever someone's got a place for rent or whenever a house comes for sale, they immediately put it out on the permaculture network. And all the permaculture folks have moved into the neighborhood. Then they got permission from the city council to steward the watershed that comes through the property. So that watershed is now all in food forests, endemic species, walking trails, little parks. And so all surrounding this community where people have distinct ownership of their own place. It's not like they have to be in community making decisions all the time, but they're working together as a community to steward their piece of the watershed. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That's fun. It's really fun. And we need to have fun while we're doing this.
Well, I love the vision you have of all of these neighborhoods and subdivisions getting together, hiring someone like you and designing the whole community around the permaculture principles. And you might have a few people who don't buy into that, right? But
Always.
it's to me, it's that link that between there's individual action and there's government action. And what's in between that is these small communities, right? So it's not just what you grow in your garden, but what you can pull a few other people together in. And I love that you mentioned church property or, you know, it's not just what the property you own, it's any land that you have access to. I've been talking to our team here about covering bare ground. And I said, the bare ground that bothers me is between the parking lot and the door of my library. Like, I need a Boy Scout group out there,
Right.
knowing how to restore the soil and plant some cover crops. Uh, and when you think about that scale, when you can imagine it and not think about just what can I do, but what does my community look like? I think you're right that all kinds of things open up. And particularly, you mentioned this sense of abundance, like sharing your surplus. And if you've never gardened or had that, it's the zucchini incident, right? It's that like I have so much of something that giving away is a good thing, right? I want to get rid of this. I want to share it. And that sense that you have something you can just share that way uh, is is really changing and how and particularly in a commercial based, transactional based culture that we live in that just
Right.
yeah.
So yeah, so let's look at that suburb equation again. So let's say that we got a grant to plant a food tree, a fruit tree, or an avocado tree, or whatever combination of things at everybody's house, right? So what's the cost of that? You got 120, 200 houses in your subdivision, right? So there's the cost of 200 trees, there's the cost of the labor, there's the workshops that go with it, there's the understory plants, and then the commitment from the homeowner that they're going to water it. But imagine how much food that is. Like if we did 20% of that in nut trees and it's, avocados, like we up here we can grow everything. We can grow bananas and pineapples and papayas and star fruit and mulberries and like the list just goes, all the citrus grows up here, all the avocados grow, mangoes, like we can grow everything. But where you live, where anybody lives, you have food that grows where you live. Like what would it look like to have apples and pears and thornless blackberries down the alleys? Like it's not that hard to do. It's a matter of just understanding what you're supposed to do. I mean, I think sometimes with a lot of my clients, I have this, they have a really big vision already, but they don't know how to bring it to fruition. I mean, I like that word in this context, right? Because we're all about fruit. So, like, how do we bring that to fruition? They more or less want permission to do what they already know they want to do. They just need to have the design principles or the design foundational template available so they can just take it from there, right? What we're looking for. And what you don't want to do is have that food fall on the ground and rot. And then you have bees, and then that's a liability, right? So part of your design for that is what does it look like in a few years when you start to have harvest? Like in 5 years, you have to be ready for that harvest. What are you doing in and around those fruit trees while they're maturing, right? You have this window of time. You have all this time and space under the tree to grow stuff. So what else can you grow? You can grow artichokes, you can grow asparagus, you can grow all kinds of things, perennial foods or annual foods, it doesn't matter. Or you could just do flowers, or you could do endemic species. Like you could choose to support the local flora and fauna that way. So one thing that's really fun about humans is that we love to specialize, right? So in these neighborhood projects, there's always the tomato person, there's always the pesto person, like there's always somebody that really anchors one piece of what they're doing. There's always the person that wants to take all the food and make a big feast twice, 3 times a year or whatever. So you take on the role that you're interested in with these things that you're creating and growing together.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, you mentioned skilling up and other skills, and that's kind of the balance of an energy descent. Um, what, just a little bit of a broader view of resilience and community resilience as climate chaos is upon us, expanding. You had a great quote. I would steal it from you, but about, I'll let you, yeah, I'll let you say it about the summer, right? What is the temperature of this summer and the next summer? And how are we ready as a species, community, society for all the different kinds of disruptions?
Right. Well, last spring at this time, I sat down with some of my community and colleagues and friends, and I said out loud, this is going to be the hottest summer on record. And at the end of this summer, and by the end of September, we're going to look back in the summer and go, oh my God, what are we going to do? And then, the fires took out our whole city of Lahaina in one night, in August. And all across the world, people were reporting in these extremes. And so it's one thing to have 2 days of 110 degrees. It's another thing to have 2 weeks of 114 degrees and you weren't expecting it. I mean, the impact's not just on ourselves and our psyche and our bodies, like that's hard enough. But what it's doing overall, is it's really disheartening. It's hard. I'm saying the same thing out loud again today. By the end of this summer and fall, the level of understanding of what's coming for us at this point, it's it's gonna it's gonna increase. So what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? What are you doing right now? And that's really what this conversation is about today, Beck, is challenging our audience, challenging people listening. What repository of knowledge do you want to embody? Like, what do you want to bring to the table? I think that in our culture, we have this very bad habit of expecting the table to be set by somebody else. Someone else grows the food, someone harvests it, someone washes it, someone packages it, ships it, someone else cooks it, someone else puts it on the table and we just eat it and expect someone to clean up after. And I'm just being stark with that because it's an easy metaphor. But really, let's look at it again. What are you bringing to the table? Like in Hawaii, it's the canoe metaphor, right? Who's in your canoe? Who's not in your canoe? Like, who do you need in your canoe? And I don't mind if people get in the canoe that don't have skills. They just have to be ready and willing to learn. What I don't want is that person who hangs their leg over the side of the canoe and slows it down. Like, I don't really want that person in the canoe. So, how do we attract those people? How do you get excited about something that your community can rely on you for? Right? What does that look like, not just at your work setting and not just in your immediate family setting? What does it mean to be an important person in your community? Whether that means that you know water systems, or you know food systems, or you know insulation systems, or organizational systems, whatever. Like the preparedness, um, we're so far behind the curve. Like really, you can plug yourself in anywhere. If you decided that you wanted to be the passive hot water specialist for your neighborhood, in 2 years, you would own that. Like you would know more than 98% of the people in the world about passive solar hot water. Why are you paying for hot water that's heated by what, diesel fuel? Like what, where does your electricity come from? Hydroelectric? Like you don't even, most people don't even know where their electricity comes from. Like why are you relying on a grid system when you could decentralize and have it for free? Like these are things that I challenge people about a lot. Like what does it look like to have smaller, easier to fix, decentralized systems with local skill sets embedded in your community? And which skill set are you going to choose to have? It doesn't mean you aren't a professional in the other things that you do. It just means that you're adding something important that your community will need moving forward, even if you're just the beginning of that. I mean, that's the quote from the Torah, right? It's like it's not your job to finish it, but it is your job to start it. And what does that look like? What does starting look like for you?
Well, I think that is an inspiring challenge for all of us. I mean, it certainly made me think about things I'm just kind of good at that, maybe could be valuable if I spent a little more time at them. And, how would that help the folks in my canoe in my community in a localized way? I think a lot of the policy level discussions we're having now are not looking at decentralized solutions. They are looking at keeping business as usual alive with, a conversation of less carbon. And the challenges we're facing will probably not allow for that. And is that the kind of life we want? Where's the abundance? Where's the Pono, the take care? Where's that
Right.
sense of community, right?
Right.
Why invest in something that isn't really any better than what we have?
Well, and that's that we talked about that in the preamble to this. It's like, where's the leadership? I mean, that was even part of the title of the talk today. It's like, I am not relying on state, even county leadership anymore, and certainly not federal leadership. Like it's not happening. Like we're spinning our wheels on things that are not the most relevant stuff when I anticipate what's coming in the next few years around climate instability. I do not see really any leadership of substance that I can count on. And you can go to the philanthropic level, but I think this is a bootstrap moment. It's like, what does it look like to become engaged in a civic way? And I'm not saying that from a place of patriotism. That's not what I'm meaning. I'm meaning that we used to have more civic duty embedded in our community. I think that's still the case more on the East Coast of the United States, but less so in other parts of the country, and less so year by year by year. So what is that? What does that look like? What does that feel like to you to be challenged or be asked or to be excited about stepping into a role that helps your community thrive, that helps your teenagers not feel lonely and despairing? What does that look like to take care of your elders, to Mālama your elders? Like, what does that look like to show up at that level instead of checking out? Because a lot of people are checking out. Like, that's the question I have.
And when you talk about building community where you live, around food, around shared skills, that is also a conversation that can really unite people across some of the divides that we're struggling with right now. It does, it's something that's not politicized when you get right down to how can we grow everything for a spaghetti dinner in our neighborhood and who wants to join me in on that, right? Like it and I believe that when you work side by side with people, that's how you build community and relationships, not through a lot of meetings, right?
Right. Okay, so here's a good easy example. So in our neighborhood in Seattle, these folks that had rented the same house for like 20 years finally had to move out, and they had a pizza oven, one of those wood-fired pizza ovens. So they had to get rid of it. The landlord, the owner of the house didn't want it. So we deconstructed it and we took it to our house. We rebuilt it our house. All neighborhood folks rebuilt the pizza oven. And then we would have, twice a month we'd have pizza dinners. And I would just go put a flyer on people's door up and down my street. It's like spontaneous pizza dinner. We'll do the dough and the sauce. You bring everything else. And people would just show up with all kinds of stuff, whether it was pepperoni or peppers or salads or dessert pizzas, like, and we would just have a fun night. And it was whoever showed up, that was we got to play with. People bring instruments and their kids, and everybody got to make their own pizza. And I know that sounds like really silly and small, but yeah, if it's not silly and fun, like I really don't want to do it. So it's kind of, helping people to find the fun in it too. It can't just all be serious all the time. Like there has to be this deep, deep-seated part of joy that comes with it. So we do a lot of that. We play a lot of music. We grow food together. We invite our neighbors over. We host events, and you don't all have to be the hub of activity, but think of something that you would want to do that your community would enjoy.
We did have a question about Maui, but I think that was addressed, Jenny, just how reclaiming and restoring the sugarcane plantations is going. Your earlier discussion, it didn't sound like much was happening on that. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, I mean, sugarcane wrapped up here about 8 years ago, and it was very controversial to the end. I mean, they would burn the detritus left over from sugarcane, and all that black, flaky stuff would fall on people's cars and houses, and so sugarcane as a commodity was subsidized hugely by the United States Farm Bill. And they were still losing, tens of millions of dollars a year in sugarcane. So they shuttered sugarcane. And my team was asked to write a report on how to transition all like 60,000 acres into regenerative agriculture. And we realized at that point that the local government really didn't even have a vocabulary for regenerative agriculture 10 years ago. So we work with that, and it ended up being bought by the Canadian Pension Fund, who's using that land as a sort of, in my opinion, a greenwashing of their portfolio. So they're supposed to have a certain percentage of their portfolio in green investments, and they're using the Maui farmland as that. But the water that comes from that's all stolen from the Hawaiians on the east side of the island. And they built this very extensive ditch system which catches the rain as it comes down the mountain, so it doesn't go down into local agriculture, it doesn't go down to the local shore where all the fish breed. And so here we're continuing that. And then they got busted for using paraquat and all kinds of other restricted use chemicals. And and yes, they employ some people, and I get that that's controversial, that these are jobs in the economy. And it's a foreign-owned company, owns 60,000 acres of Maui farmland. And yeah, so the sugarcane transition's been interesting to say the least.
How about mycorrhizal socks? Are you familiar with that? How are they being used?
So the whole fungi movement and industry has really just myceliated enormously over the last few years. So in the bioremediation, that within the week after the Lahaina fires, we had put together a coalition of people in mycoremediation as well as other kinds of bioremediation to try to stop the toxic uh, debris, dust, and then as soon as it rained, the slurry of that toxic stuff going down into the ocean. Um, it was an amazing group of people and still is. It's a very big multi-stakeholder group too. Maui Nui Marine Resources, and everybody from the Coast Guard to you know, to the local fungi people are involved. It's a very big coalition. In the end, FEMA didn't want to pay for the mycorrhizal types of socks and those things because they don't know about it. It's not on their list of approved things to pay for. And so the county got really stuck between a rock and a hard place. What are we going to let them give us money for versus are we going to force them to go in this bioremediation direction? Mycorrhizal impregnated socks are awesome. I totally love them. They should be wrapped around every drain to help to filter water going down into the streams and creeks and lakes and ponds and water edges. So yes, I've used them many times. I think they're really a great way to go. You can look up more stuff on fungi. I can guarantee you there's a local fungi person not far from you, wherever you live, and they're all up to really interesting stuff.
So the last couple questions are about how people can learn this for themselves. And one question is about taking your classes, even if they don't live in Hawaii. The other question is, do you have to invest in getting your full permaculture design course, which is, time consuming and expensive, or are there other ways to start to implement these ideas?
Yeah, there's a lot of permaculture courses online. One of my favorite colleagues and friends, Andrew Millison, Millison, he works at Oregon State University and he has the largest MOOC, the massive online course. He's taught thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the world the core permaculture design course. And so that's one, you can take an online course. That's done over a series of months. You don't have to go do a residential program. The residential program is really can be great. I've taught it a lot. It's a 2-week commitment, but I don't really do that anymore. If I'm going to teach the permaculture curriculum, it's usually a 5 or 6 month course. There's going to be a couple weekends a month, lots of field trips, and my classes are more than 50% hands-on. I want people to leave with skills. And so I do have a class coming up next November with Don Tipping with Siskiyou Seeds. He has a seed company there. He just got back from Kenya where he was visiting a whole seed program there. And his takeaway from that is that food security really is in small women-owned seed banks. And that's where your first food security lies. And so we're going to be doing an advanced class on climate resilient agroforestry and seed banks and neighborhood food. So if you are already involved in landscaping or you're already involved in seed banks or you're already working for an NGO that has any sort of crossover with that, you'd be a good candidate for that course. I can just suggest look up the name of your county or your town and just put like, you know, New Haven, permaculture, Connecticut, like see what comes up. Like, just find who your local permaculture people are. And they often are teaching all kinds of workshops and they often have hands-on events that go on. And if I had a lot of people that were keen on, like we want to do an agroforestry conference here. I sit on the board of the Abundant Earth Foundation, and we're a nonprofit organization. We support permaculture projects internationally. And my project is one of my projects is on there. So Honu, Honu means turtle in Hawaiian. And so our project is called A Honu World. And so we raise scholarship money for people to take classes. So we've had a lot of generous people donate over the years. We've done permaculture programs for single moms and kids and like campesinas in Nicaragua. Like we do stuff bilingually. And I also really love to work in Europe. So there's I have European counterparts. And international is thoroughly, one more time, permaculture is thoroughly international. So there's permaculture in Africa, there's permaculture in India, there's permaculture in New Zealand. Like we're all over the world. And we're seeing our students 10, 20, 30 years on just getting up to the most amazing work. So just find your local permaculture folks. That would be my first suggestion. There's a long-winded answer to that one.
Well, and we know there are probably small steps you can learn too without learning the whole design. And what I really take away from talking with you, Jenny, is now's the time to start, and don't wait until the crisis is at its peak. I love what you said about the fruit and nut trees. They're going to bear fruit in 5 years. Don't plant them when it's too late, right? And
Right,
and don't do it. You don't have to do it out of fear either. Do it out of joy to create the kind of community that
right.
shares and works together. I love that.
Right. Okay, and I'll also just throw out there because we've got a couple minutes left is I travel. I love to travel. I love to consult across the US mainland. I love to consult internationally. A really good way to have someone like me, it doesn't have to be me, but someone like me, have someone like me come for like a Friday night lecture. We'll do a Saturday hands-on workshop, and then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday can be private design consultations. And we'll go on field trips and look at other local projects. And if we can stack a couple of those up, in and around the Boston area, it'd be really fun for me. I was born in Boston. I haven't been there in years. And so that's another option. You can reach out to me personally and we can talk about it from there.
Well, and I don't know if we really talked about your idea of how a neighborhood or homeowners association we talked about how they could come and do this, but the idea that they would get together to hire a permaculturist
Right.
to
I've been
design.
chewing on that one for years. So urban or suburban, right? So let's say you have, it's just easy, 100 houses in your subdivision. If everybody put in $100 a month, that's enough to hire somebody full-time and somebody part-time and have a budget to plant stuff. So if you're willing to, how much money do you spend on organic food or just on food in general? So I think that that's a really great concept that we need to build that up, right? To be able to have salaried neighborhood permaculturalists, that is an amazing way forward for all of this. And I've seen it be successful on different scales in different areas, but I think that's one that's really worth pursuing.
So I hope that when you leave tonight, our audience, that you dream about your neighborhood organized by Jenny and her friends, full of fruit trees and all kinds of produce and gardens, and of course, full of music and goodwill and sharing abundance. Well, I think we'll wrap up right there on the top of the hour. You can learn more about different ways that people are growing food locally and in local communities on the Bio for Climate playlist, and look for our redesigning our communities for life after fossil fuels playlist. And that covers our conferences around the country where we talked with farmers and indigenous and BIPOC farmers and people working in just this way all in their communities all around the country. And you can check out some of those videos on that playlist. At Bio for Climate, we're not waiting for governments. We're not waiting for corporations. We're not waiting for the energy profile to change. We're getting to work right now restoring ecosystems. And one way you can do it is by growing food in your own neighborhood, your own community. Follow us and learn more about how that all works. Thank you, Jenny, for taking the time to talk with us today. I am inspired. And I also like to thank GBH Forum Network for their partnership in Life Saves the Planet and always doing a great job with these discussions. Jenny, last word.
Thanks everybody for listening, and I really look forward to you connecting with your local permaculture folks.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.